Exactly 50 years ago, something special started in Bowden, Alberta. Since then, the Alberta Conference Camp meeting has touched many lives. And this year, we'd like to go back to how it all began. With the very first theme we had at Foothills Camp. We invite you to the 2023 Alberta Conference Camp meeting. Come join us to celebrate 50 years of moving by His Spirit.
Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you had a good night, despite the wind, the storm, the rain, whatever it was. You know, yesterday I praised the weather, and lo and behold, it started raining, so I have to be more careful what I say here. But it's good to see you again, and thank you for the kind invitation. You know, when I'm introduced at meetings like this, they usually try to be kind and generous, and they introduce me as Dr. Hasel. Now that's okay, you know, I've earned a PhD, a doctorate, and that's okay. But when I'm in the church, and I consider a camp meeting like a church meeting, when I'm in church, I much more prefer just to be Brother Frank Hasel. You know, in the church, we are brothers and sisters. We don't have the academic hierarchy that really is out in the world. So within the church, I think it's beautiful that we call each other brothers and sisters, because we are all children of Jesus Christ, our Savior, aren't we? Yes. Now, let me ask you a question before I start my little presentation for today. I see, if I look around, can I see the hands of those active lay members, church members, elders, who have preached a sermon before? Can I see the hands? I'm happy to see that there are several of you who have preached sermons in church. That is wonderful. If you want to have an experience that really improves, that really thrives you on the spiritual side, give it a try and preach. Preach a sermon, preach an evangelistic meeting, a presentation, and you will see that it's not just a blessing to others, it's a blessing to yourself. So for all those who have ever preached a sermon, here's a little story that I would like to share with you. The story is told of a young pastor, an intern, and he was assigned to preach at a tiny, tiny little country church way out in the countryside. He had never been to that country church. He didn't know anyone in the church. No one knew him. It was his very first assignment, and he was a little nervous. So the day came, and he started his journey to this little tiny country church way out in the countryside. And after a long journey, the bumpy, dusty road, he finally arrived at this tiny little country church, only to realize there's nobody there. There was nobody there to greet him, no deacon. There was nobody in the church to play the music. There were no children. The church was completely empty, except for one old man sitting in the front row of the church. So the young pastor got a little irritated. He didn't know what to do. He had come to preach. He traveled a long ways to the church. He arrived only to find out that the church was empty. So he didn't know, what shall I do now? So he mustered all his courage, and he went up front to the old gentleman, and he said, "Excuse me, sir," he said, "I'm the new preacher here. I'm supposed to preach today, but I see the church is empty. What shall we do? And the old man just graciously smiled at the young preacher and said, I'm just an old farmer. I don't know much about theology, but this I know. If I would come to my farm and see that all my cows have run away except for one, I would still give that cow something to eat. Now that is wisdom. So the young man, he felt encouraged. He went to the pulpit and he started to preach. And he preached, and he preached, and he preached a long sermon. He preached everything he had ever learned in seminary, and he was so excited to preach a wonderful, long sermon. And at the end of his sermon, he went to the door to say goodbye to the one person who had listened to his sermon. And now the young person, he was really curious, and he wanted to know, how did I do? How did he like my sermon? And so as he shook the hand of the person who had listened to his sermon, he took all his courage and he dared to ask him, excuse me, but tell me, how did you like my sermon? And the old man just graciously smiled at the young pastor and said, you know, I told you, I'm just an old farmer. I don't know much about theology, but this I know. If I would come to my farm and see that all my cows have run away, except for one, I would still give that cow something to eat. But I would not feed that cow everything at once. So I will not tell you everything I know, everything there is on our subject today. There is plenty of information, plenty of insights to be gained. I just want to share a few things with you that I think are important in our daily walk with God as we deal with more and more things that we have to juggle and handle, and more digital gadgets that we own and want to use. I don't know about you, but my experience is that life is cram-packed to the brim with all kinds of activities and things I want to pursue, I want to enjoy. In a society that is madly driven by consumerism and marketing values, we are easily lured to believe that the more we have, the happier we will be. Because of the tempting promises of the advertisements all around us, we wrongly desire to have it all. And sometimes it seems to me that we extend this thinking even to our work with God, to our relationship with God. We sincerely want to serve God, but at the same time, if we are really honest to ourselves, we don't want to miss out on anything that crosses our path, right? We want to enjoy it all. And so we desperately try to harmonize our desires to serve God, while at the same time continue to chase happiness in an endless pursuit to gather more and more. And so we add more and more to our already full plate. And this leads us to be engaged in what I would call a whirlwind of activities. In a restless hurry, we fool ourselves to believe that it is possible to follow God without letting go of things that distract us and that compete for our attention and allegiance. And when we apply this deceptive thinking to our spiritual walk with God, I think we are deceived. we are deceived. We cannot have it all. We just have to face that reality. The world and its luring pleasures and all the blessings of God at the same time. It is not possible, believe me, it is not possible to please everyone. You cannot dance at 2 weddings at the same time, as we used to say in German. It's not possible. You have to make choices. In life, you have to learn to set priorities to the things that are really important for you. You have to learn to deliberately live with less in order to enjoy a fuller, more meaningful, more satisfactory life. It's like if I should use an illustration, a comparison. I mean, every comparison, every illustration is limited, but just for the sake of illustration, you know what a wheelbarrow is? Do you know what a wheelbarrow is? On farms, you used to have wheelbarrows, and you put things on there, and then you would go along and dump it somewhere else. If you have a wheelbarrow, and that wheelbarrow is full already, and you push it to a certain place, and you see something else while you're on the way, and you want to put that something else on top of everything, what is the result? Something will drop. Something will fall off. Something is too much to be still carried. And that is our experience often in our lives when we deal with everything that is attractive to us. And then we want to serve God on top of that as well. When this mentality of consumerism infects our thinking, I think it has a disastrous effect on our spiritual lives. It misdirects the direction of our spiritual pursuit. We cannot have God on top of everything else in our life, quasi as the icing on the cake, without purposefully making room for Him in the crowdedness of our hectic lives. We first must be willing to live with less to experience the blessings of things that matter more in our lives. We cannot have a fulfilling spiritual life without being willing to let go of those things that distract us from God and His presence, that crowd our time, that deplete our energies, physical, mental, spiritual energies. And when we try to juggle our jam-packed schedule at every increasing speeds, in a desperate attempt to add new things to an activity list that goes longer and longer and longer, we will quickly find ourselves exhausted, literally exhausted physically and deeply depleted spiritually. Some people talk about burnout, and you face that because you want to have it all, and you realize it's just not manageable. So here's my question for you this morning. Do you feel in your life, sometimes that the clutter in your life is holding you back from fully living for God? When our lives are so crowded that there is hardly any room for the creator of the universe, I think we have to learn to let go of things to create living space for our living Lord. Don't you think so? We must learn and understand that less is more, spiritually thinking. We can't have more spiritual blessings. We can't have more prayer time. We can't have more of this or that spiritually speaking, if we only want to add it to an already full plate. We must learn to live with less in order to experience more of what really counts. Adding only to the many things we do already will result not in more spiritual blessings, it will lead to greater emptiness. It will lead to greater dissatisfaction in our lives. It requires a decisive decision to live purposefully with less so that we can experience more of what matters for God. Less is more. So let me repeat that. Less is more. Now recently, I noticed that a friend of mine lives in a toxic relationship. Do you know toxic relationships? So I noticed he lives in a toxic relationship. He spends an inordinate amount of time with the love of his life, failing to invest in other important areas in his own life. And he is so dependent that he gets very, very anxious if he is alone for more than just a few minutes. He can't seem to make decisions anymore without consulting his partner, who expects many hours of his time day by day, constantly distracting him, literally following him everywhere he goes, and even distancing him from his real human friends. He seems to realize that his partner is needy and that his partner is quite demanding, hence a toxic relationship. But for some strange reason, my friend can't set proper boundaries to their relationship. And perhaps the saddest part of the whole story is that my friend isn't dating a woman. He is simply in a relationship with his phone. Does that sound familiar to you? No matter where he goes, even going to the restroom, his phone has to be with him. There's absolutely no privacy anymore. We truly live in extraordinary times. And when you look at that, you find that technology has fundamentally changed the way we live. Technology has fundamentally changed the way we work. It has even changed the way we think. It has changed the way we communicate with each other. Technology can be a tremendous blessing, connecting us with faraway friends, with family members. You know, I had the privilege of just about 6-7 months ago, my first granddaughter was born. And my son and his family, they live in Northern California, and I live on the other side of the North American continent, in Maryland and Silver Spring. I can't see them as often as I would like to, but thank God there is FaceTime, and there is WhatsApp, and there are video sessions where you can see my granddaughter, where I can see my granddaughter, where I can talk to her and interact with her. Technology makes a lot of things happening that are wonderful, that are a blessing. Technology can supply us with valuable information. It can provide new tools, even for Bible study and for evangelism. But the same technology also comes with a very real temptation and a high price tag and some risks. The digital age in which we live is marked by a strange paradox. Although it connects us with infinite possibilities At our fingertips, it can easily isolate us from real-life relationships. It can also keep us so distracted that we miss out on what matters really the most in life. Virtual reality, as real as it might seem, is a far cry from life in the real world. Amen? And if we're not careful, our virtual living may compete with our virtuous living and our real relationship with God. Virtues, positive character traits, are not created instantly in the digital realm. Character traits, good character traits, virtues, can grow only in real life and over time. Character development requires quiet, steady, uninterrupted time. It requires time to pray, to meditate on God's Word, to thoughtfully evaluate our lives, and then to practice, to actually put into practice the very things we want to see flourishing in our lives. And digital distractions can easily intrude upon this time and process. And to protect ourselves from this, we must be mindful and we have to be intentional about the way we manage time and how we use modern technology. Now, I don't know whether you've experienced a similar thing like that, but I was recently dining at a nice restaurant. And I went to that place, sat at a table, and as I was waiting for the person to come to give me the menu, options, etc., I was sitting there and I started to look around. And as I started looking around, I noticed that practically every other customer in the restaurant that I was in was on his or her smartphone. They were sitting there looking at their smartphone. There were couples sitting together at the same table, and instead of looking to each other into each other's eyes, instead of communicating from person to person, they would type something in their smartphone. They would send a message to the neighbor right next to them on the next chair. The other day I was visiting a major capital city in Europe, and I took public transportation, something that we're not so blessed with in the United States. But in Europe, you have a wonderful public transportation. So I was sitting in a bus, and as I was sitting in the bus, I looked around, and I noticed that hardly any of the other passengers in a full bus made eye contact with me or with another person. Instead, almost everyone in the bus was looking at his or her iPhone very intensely. And then I noticed they started to leave the bus because the bus stopped, the doors opened, they left the bus. They continued to focus on their iPhone, leaving the bus, entering right into traffic. They didn't even notice that there are cars coming, that there are bicycles riding by. They were so occupied by the importance of what they saw on their screen. Smartphones can be so alluring that we allow them to isolate us, to compromise even our safety. Technology also gives us the illusion that we are self-dependent. Nowadays, when you travel, you don't need to ask for directions anymore. How do I get to this place? Can you explain me how to drive there? No, we have a map, we have an app, we look it up on our iPhone. The iPhone directs us to wherever we want to go. You see it in the classroom, you see it in the normal conversations we have day by day. You talk about something, and instead of discussing different options, instead of communicating and dialoguing over something that we have different opinions about, this all stops. The person just takes his iPhone, types it in, and Dr. Google has the answer, right? Whatever I need to know, I just Google it, and Dr. Google gives me the answer. And that's the final definite word on everything. And with a few simple clicks and swipes, we can roam the whole world, and we have access to more information than we can even absorb in a lifetime. So this situation really creates unique challenges to our spiritual life. This situation really creates unique challenges to how we spend our time and how we use the technology that is available to us. The nearly infinite information that is available at our fingertips poses each one of us with a serious challenge. How do I find my way in the digital data jungle? What data that I find, even if I type in Google, what data that I'm presented at is pre-selected for me by certain algorithms and marketing ploys, rather than a wise selection of the content that I really need. Did you know that when you type in keywords in your search engine, whether that is Google or Bing or whatever it is, that's not just presenting you with objective data. They screen the data and they have programmed the search machines with certain algorithms that will lead you to spend more time on the internet, that will lead you to find the things that you are more interested in, that confirms your bias with which you start your search in the first place. Today we have a challenge that is very different from former days and former ages. In previous generations, there was a challenge that we had a lack of information available. People did not have the information available to them, and this led to ignorance and to other handicaps. Today, we have the exact opposite situation in our society. We navigate through a maze of endlessly available information, and often we end our search overloaded by such a mountain of information that we cannot even process it all, and in the end, we are just as uninformed as we were at the beginning, only that we think we are more informed, that we know more. So technology promises freedom, but it can easily take us captive. And much of technology, especially on social media, has been especially engineered and designed in such a way that it leads you in greater addiction and dependency on what you use. And once we've become accustomed to it, it is hard to live without such a gadget. So let's consider the following sobering statistics. Let's see if the technique works here. People tell us, and I hope you can see that on the screen, that we check our smartphones every 4.3 minutes when we are awake. Obviously, when we sleep, we don't do that normally. But once we are awake, the time we are awake, every 4.3 minutes, people tend to use their smartphone. The average American spends 30% of leisure time online. So the free time that we have, the leisure time we have, 30% of that free time is spent online. 50% of people say that they prefer to communicate digitally rather than in person. They would prefer to send you a text message even if you're right next to them, rather than turning to the person and talk to the person. 61% admit to being addicted to the internet and their devices. Now, being addicted means if you don't have access to your smartphone, if you actually have to live a few hours, just a few hours without it, you will feel certain feelings of nervousness, trying to find where's my You might even have sensations as if your smartphone is sending you or receiving some messages where in fact you don't have any smartphone available. That's a typical sign of addiction. You've become so dependent on this gadget that you cannot live without it. The average employee checks 40 websites a day, switching activities 37 times an hour. That is more than every 2 minutes. Only an estimated 2% of people can really multitask without declining in performance. You know, people say, oh, I can do this and I can work at the same time and I can multitask. The reality is only 2% of all of us. It's not very many. Only 2% can multitask in such a way that they are better in their performance. 33% of people admit to hiding from family and friends just to check social media. Perhaps that's the reason why some people take the smartphone to the restroom, because they are private there and they can check something that they would not check in the presence of their other family and friends. 95% of people use electronics in the hour leading up to bedtime and sleep. Now, if you read on your smartphone, if you read on your iPad, just before you want to go to bed, the light from that machine does not help you to have good sleep. It helps to release certain chemicals in your brain that keep you awake and make it more difficult for you to find rest and refreshing. Artificial screen light can decrease melatonin production and interfere with your sleep. And unplugging for just one day gives some users mental and physical withdrawal symptoms. 95% of American teens have access to a smartphone. Now that's an amazing number, 95%. And 45% of those say they are online almost constantly. Now these figures and this data is not just for North America, it's not just for the US, it's for other countries as well. Now here's something that we have to understand and to learn when we deal with these challenges. In economics, there is a term that is often used that is called opportunity cost. Have you ever heard about opportunity cost? Opportunity cost refers to the valuable thing a person will miss out on if they invest a resource in something else. So let me give you an example. For example, if you spend money buying a new car, you will not be able to use the same money that you spent on the new car for a trip to Europe, let's say, or for a down payment for your house or whatever it is. So every choice you make has an opportunity cost. You can take that opportunity, but then you cannot have another opportunity instead. So if you if you stay up late, if you stay up too late, you'll pay the opportunity cost of sleep. If you stay up too late, you cannot have enough sleep. That's the cost that you have to pay. If you are a workaholic, let's say, you pay the opportunity cost of social connections. You cannot have enough and sufficient social connections. If you heavily invest in virtual reality, the real life reality will pay the price, and you will not be able to enjoy the real life reality as you would need to. So let's look at this and see what some recent data tells us about the time we use on social media. By the way, if you want to read on this and find many more interesting and recent findings, this is the website that I have consulted and where I share some of my insights with you. They have a recent statistics from the year 2022. This was just last year, just a few months ago, so it's fairly up to date. And here are some findings that are staggering. So how much time do people spend on social media in 2023, 2022 actually? Here are some of the most astonishing facts and up-to-date facts on how much time people spend on social media. The average teenager, age 13 through 17, tends to spend the most time on social media compared to any other age group. These teenagers, 13 through 17, spend an average of 8 hours and 39 minutes per day on screens, with social media being one of the most popular activities. Now, 8 hours, 8.5 hours, that's a significant chunk of time every day. The young adults, age 18 through 29, we are told, tend to spend also significant amount of time on social media, a little less than the teenagers. They spend only 5 hours or more per day on social media and on the internet. The adults, age 30 through 49, spend about 4 to 5 hours per day on social media. And just so that you don't feel too good, older adults, age 50 and above, still spend at least some 4 hours per day on the average on social media and on the internet. It's interesting, the average daily screen usage among children has increased 1.5 times during the pandemic, rising from a pre-pandemic baseline of 162 minutes per day to an amazing 246 minutes per day among children who use the internet and social media. Furthermore, teenagers and preteens saw a 17% increase in their overall screen usage between 2019 and 2021. 17% increase. This is the fastest growth rate of any group in the last couple of years. So, by the way, the average user opens WhatsApp. You're familiar with WhatsApp? Not? Am I talking to the wrong audience here? The average user uses WhatsApp 23 to 25 times daily. So this is a constant partner in your daily journey. Here is another interesting statistics. You have age groups, and then you have the average time spent on social media per day. And the statistics goes for last year, 2022. Age group 16 through 24, You have 5 hours and 45 minutes. Age group 25 through 34, you have 5 hours and 31 minutes. The next age group until age 44 is 4 hours and 49 minutes. And then age 45 through 54, 3 hours, almost 4 hours, 3 hours and 57 minutes. And then 55 and higher and older, it's still 3 hours and 3 minutes. Now, this is the average time that is being spent on the internet. If you happen to be a person who spends less time on the internet, it just tells you that there are others who will spend more time on the internet in order to come up with these figures. Additionally, the time spent on social media can have very negative effects on your mental health, on your well-being, and therefore it is recommended to be mindful of our social media usage. Now, as Christians, I believe the opportunity cost of our digital habits is especially significant. Just think how many books, that's old-fashioned. Just think how many books a person could read during this time, during the 5 to 8 hours a day that a person spends on the internet. Just think how much physical exercise a person could get in 5 to 8 hours a day. Just think how much money they could make in 5 to 8 hours a day, working rather than being on the internet. Just think how much community service they could render if they would use 5 to 8 hours a day to serve other people, to do some good in the community, etc. Benjamin Franklin, I think, once said, "Beware of the little expenses. A small leak will sink a great ship," he said. And excess screen time creates such a small leak, I believe, in our daily lives that ends up draining us of long-term effectiveness and happiness. Now, the overuse of technology can literally erode our relationship with God and others. Many Christians, sadly, walk more closely with their smartphone than with God. And each day, God has valuable lessons for us to learn, gifts for us to enjoy, relationships for us to experience, goals for us to accomplish. The choices we make each day have long-term implications. They even have eternal consequences for ourselves and others. And as we interact with these new technologies, let us remember that how we spend our hours is how we spend our days. And how we spend our days, of course, is how we spend our lives. And at the end of our lives, God will certainly ask us, "Why have you not done more for me?" And we will answer, "We just didn't have more time, Lord." And he will say, "Can you show me your smartphone?" And the smartphone will tell a very different story of how we spend our time on the internet and social media. So each one of us, I believe, needs a margin of time and space in our lives to protect our well-being. And technology can easily threaten that margin, that free time. It has been pointed out that technological progress inevitably complicates life because it adds both to our responsibilities and to our choices for information and entertainment. And economic progress, it has been pointed out, rarely results in more leisure time. Rather, it is typically leads to more work, and with more work to more debt, and that leads to more pressure to work even more. And that is exactly what many people experience today as their reality in daily life. And this constant overstimulation depletes our reserves and does not allow us to adequately use those margins in which our bodies, our minds, our money, our emotions can recuperate and be refreshed. And this leads to diminished energy, to burnout, and even to collapse. So many of us desperately need to simplify our lives. And you can simplify our lives, we can simplify our lives only by being willing to live with less, because we want to experience more that is meaningful and important in our lives. And how can we do that? Now, one way to do that is to fast. Have you ever heard about fasting? Now, there are many things we need to unlearn in order to renew and appreciate real-life experiences. I think when it comes to fasting, we can learn from biblical people, men and women of faith who, when they realized their need to reconnect with God, prioritized fasting in their lives. Fasting is not just living without eating for a certain period of time. That's what we usually associate with fasting. Fasting is the deliberate choice to abstain from something that is available to me, that is not bad in itself. Eating is not bad in itself. Abstaining from things that are not bad in itself for the purpose of reconnecting with God, of gaining a new perspective, of redirecting my life. We need to disconnect in order to reconnect with real life and with God. We need what some people have called a digital detox. We need to learn to live at least for some period of time without being dictated by these gadgets. Through fasting, I consciously set aside undisturbed time for God that otherwise would be filled with mundane things. When I fast, my vision turns from the daily routine to things of eternal significance. By abstaining from something that I use on a daily basis, I acknowledge that I do not live by bread alone. Or should I use the more contemporary version, that we do not live by the internet alone? Some people get so nervous if they don't have access to the internet that they cannot live without it anymore. And we acknowledge I do not live by the internet alone, but I live by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And as such, fasting is not confined to the question of food and drink. Fasting should really be made to include abstinence from anything that is legitimate in and of itself for the sake of some special spiritual purpose that I want to accomplish in my life. I don't know whether you want to experience such a benefit that comes from a lifestyle like that. Try to take a break from television. Try to take a break from the internet. Try to take a break from your email, from the social media, from your smartphone, from some other attractions in order to reconnect with God, yourself, and others. So here I have a few practical suggestions for you at the end of my presentation that might be helpful, that can be helpful for you if you want to reorient your life so that you're not dictated by these things, but can have room and make room deliberately to focus more on God and what is important for Him. So here are some ideas for digital detox. Number 1, and I hope you can read that. In the morning, go online only after you have spent time with God and His Word. And only after you have decided what you need to do that day. In this way, you and God can determine your agenda together before you get derailed by urgent emails, by social media, the news, etc. You know how it goes. You start, you wake up, the first thing you do, you grab your phone that was laying right next to your bed, you open it and you see, oh, you have so many new messages. And before you even start, you look at the messages, and one message leads to the next. And you say, oh, I just wanted to check on Facebook, I just wanted to check here and there on Twitter and see what was this. And one message leads to the next and to the next and to the next and to the next. And there's something interesting that I didn't know. Oh, and there's a news that I had not heard before. And before you know it, 25, 35, 40 minutes are gone. And your mind is occupied with what you read on social media rather than what you spent time with God. So in the morning, go online only after you have spent time with God and His Word. Here's the second. Try this one. Work twice a day just for 1 hour offline. Offline means you put your phone on airplane mode. Airplane mode means you cannot receive any messages, you cannot send any messages. You are basically offline. So put your phone in airplane mode, turn your internet connection off just twice a day, just for 1 hour. You will see after some practice, this will not be easy. This will not be easy at the beginning. I tell you, if you're so used to use that, this will be a tough one. But after a little practice, you will be amazed how productive you will be in those 2 hours, undisturbed. Here's number 3. Consider setting aside a half, or if you can, a full day, once or twice each month, to deliberately disconnect and focus instead on what is important to you spiritually, professionally, and personally. Take the time, half a day, 6 hours, maybe a full day, once or twice a month, just to take time to disconnect and refocus on what is really important for you personally, professionally, spiritually. Number 4, check your emails only during restricted periods during the day. Have your email box turned off during the rest of the day, even on your smartphone. You know, the smartphone is so connected to your computer that the emails that you receive on your computer will also show up on your smartphone. And your smartphone is your constant companion, and you don't have any time for yourself. So take some time every day. Say, these are the hours, these are the minutes in which I will attend to the emails that come in. And if a person has sent an email and you have not responded within the next 10 minutes or 15 minutes or hour, it can wait. And if it's really important, the person will attempt to reach you more often, believe me. Number 5. In the hour before you go to bed, before you go sleeping, turn off your devices and instead read a good book. Why not the Bible? Could be another good book, but it doesn't hurt to read the Bible. Instead of reading the latest news, watching the latest video clips, watching whatever is on your smartphone, the thoughts that you will fill your minds during the last hour before you go to bed will entertain your subconscious during the time you sleep and will help you to refresh and wake up more refreshed. Number 6, use an app or use a phone feature to track and record your screen time every week, and or to limit your use of certain social media platforms. Do you know that every smartphone tracks how much time you spend on which app, on what social media platform, etc.? Check it out on your app, on your smartphone. You will make some embarrassing discoveries. How much time you spend on Instagram, how much time you spend on Snapchat, how much time you spend on Twitter, on Facebook, on this and on that. See how much time you actually spend on this. It might look much shorter to you, it might feel much shorter to you, but the reality is that you might spend a considerable amount of time every day, every week on some of these platforms and apps. Pay attention to the cumulative time you're spending, and set goals for the amount of time you really want to spend. Number 7. Have you thought about Sabbath rest from your digital world? You know, the Sabbath is a wonderful institution that God has given us. We sometimes think very limited about Sabbath rest. But if we are talking about digital gadgets, if we are talking about the social media world, the Sabbath offers us a unique opportunity to rest from the pressures of comparing ourselves to others, from the pressure of using the next information that is available, that floods the inbox. So leave your phone, if you can, leave your phone in flight mode, or leave it at home, and leave your computer off on the Sabbath day. This will enable you to enjoy quality time with your Creator and Redeemer, as well as with valuable people that He has placed in your life. By the way, if you would like to learn more about the remarkable impact the Sabbath can have on our thinking, and how the Sabbath actually can help stimulate our thinking process and our well-being, I invite you to read the chapter on Sabbath rest in my recent book, Living for God. They still have a few copies in the ABC here on campus. They told me they have ordered 63 copies. This might not be enough for all of you, so first come, first serve. But in that book you will find many more very practical suggestions that can help you enhance your spiritual life and your walk with God. Now here's an amazing insight from a Christian writer that I greatly admire. And she has written something that is well worth pondering. At her time, internet was not existing yet. She didn't know about internet and social media. But she wrote something remarkable in the Book of Education, pages 260 to 261. I just want to read that quotation from Ellen White to you. She says, "An intensity such as never before was seen is taking possession of the world in amusement, in money-making, in the contest for power, in the very struggle for existence. There is a terrible force that engrosses body and mind and soul. And in the midst of this maddening rush, God is speaking. He bids us come apart and commune with him. Be still and know that I am God. Many, even in their seasons of devotion, she writes, fail of receiving the blessings of real communion with God. They are in too great haste. With hurried steps, they press through the circle of Christ's loving presence, pausing perhaps a moment within the sacred precincts, but not waiting for counsel. They have no time to remain with the divine teacher. With their burdens, they return to their work. They are not refreshed. And then she continues, these workers can never attain the highest success until they learn the secret of strength. They must give themselves time to think, to pray, to wait upon God for a renewal of physical, mental, and spiritual power. They need the uplifting influence of His Spirit. Receiving this, they will be quickened by fresh life. The wearied frame and tired brain will be refreshed. The burdened heart will be lightened. So let me conclude by saying this. Biblical spirituality, the spiritual life that the Bible describes for us, the spiritual life that God delights in, is analog. It is not digital. Let me repeat, the spiritual life that we should strive for is analog. It is not digital. It is based on personal, it is based on practical practices, tangible practical practices between real people and the living God. See, tangible things are by their very nature analog. They are not virtual. Biblical spirituality is affected by analog things that impact our growth and that shape the character of our spiritual experience. While the God of the Bible is invisible to human eyes, He has called us to practice very specific analog things that express our relationship with Him. Take our works, for example. Works, by their very nature, are analog. You do something practical with your hands. You produce something. The practical things that we do for God, that we do for other human beings, are always analog in nature. Or think about Sabbath keeping, Sabbath observance. To keep the Sabbath holy involves specific analog practices like rest. You cannot rest virtually. Rest needs an analog, tangible, physical expression. The same thing is true for worship. You cannot worship digitally. Worship needs an analog, human, bodily expression in voice and in hearing and in responding, in awe, and all that belongs to worship. And this holds true for many other things, the fellowship with real human beings in church on Sabbath morning. Now, it is possible to join a digital worship service via Zoom or the internet. It's even possible, I read about this just recently, to have a worship service that is produced by artificial intelligence. But the ultimate biblical worship experience finds its fulfillment in very analog commitments and in the participation and fellowship with real people like we are here now, today, this morning, in tangible places. Think about it. practical and real acts of kindness, practical and real acts of grace, acts of forgiveness, acts of compassion, the experience of awe. You know, we have lost that. We practice church worship as if it's a routine. We have lost being in awe for our fantastic God and who He is and what He can do. The experience of adoration are meaningful only when we experience them analog. No virtual reality can replace or surpass an analog human touch. You will not be comforted by a digital touch. But if someone comes to you and touches you, it makes a whole big difference. Cannot be surpassed by anything digital. A kiss. A kiss is an analog act. You cannot kiss another person virtually. A helping hand, the comfort of a heartfelt embrace, a bear hug, as they say, the joy of physically felt laughter. Have you ever laughed so hard that your belly hurt because you laughed so hard? That's an analog experience. The firmness of a welcoming handshake. These are all analog acts. They are acts that express our spiritual life and how we relate to others. And mind you, you cannot even celebrate the practice of foot washing or the eating and the drinking of the emblems of communion. The Lord's Supper, you cannot do virtually. These are analog acts. What Jesus has instituted through His own example wants to be remembered analog, real, in real life. Even our prayers, even the practice of fasting that are encouraged throughout Scripture are analog acts in time and space. Our faith in God always has an analog dimension in which it becomes visible. While we human beings can virtually do all things, our relationship with God and the expression of our spiritual walk with Jesus can never be reduced to just a virtual reality. Think for a moment, just for a moment at the end of my presentation. Think for a moment of all the blessings that analog acts can bring into your life. A helping hand in support of a tangible need. A gentle touch that signals you are not alone. The value of a handwritten postcard, a handwritten letter that you can hold in your hands, that you can get from your mailbox. When was the last time that you wrote a handwritten postcard with some encouraging words, with an encouraging message, a handwritten letter to another person? If you haven't done that in a long time, think about it. Try it. It is an analog act that will bring much joy, much encouragement. The extension of undeserved forgiveness, the extension of grace that results in a transformed personal relationship, the sharing of food with those who are hungry, the experience of hospitality with those who are traveling or who do not have a home where they can stay. These and many more are very analog blessings that want to be experienced analog in real life, time and space. So I end by saying this: enjoy the accomplishments of the digital world, but do not forget the blessings that come only through your analog acts. And have the courage to be a bit more analog in your relationship with God and with your fellow human beings. May this be our experience, I pray. Amen.